You've seen this image before. You probably know that this is Saturn's moon Mimas and that it looks like the Death Star from Star Wars. You might even know why it's called the Death Star, which is because there's this huge crater on it called Herschel. And if you were to blow up something like Earth at exactly the right angle, you'd get an image that looks pretty similar to this. But this video isn't about any of that. We want to talk about how Mimas may actually be hiding a secret. It's not the Death Star, it's just covered in ice. Well, except for that one crater, of course. We're gonna tell you all about Mimas, the moon that may or may not have a giant space laser, but definitely has a secret ocean underneath its icy surface. Hey, everybody, welcome to our channel where we try and answer the great mysteries of the universe one video at a time. So let's talk about Mimas. It was discovered by French astronomer Jean-Philippe de la Hire in 1674, but it wasn't until 1980 that we got any good images of the place. That's when NASA's Voyager 1 probe passed by Saturn and snapped a picture that revealed just how insanely cratered this poor little moon is. Since then, we've learned that Mimas is about 396 kilometers across, which is about a third of the size of our moon. It orbits Saturn every 22 hours and is the innermost of the planet's known moons. The thing is, though, despite its small size, it's really dense. In fact, it's so dense that scientists think it's made mostly of rock rather than ice. And that makes absolutely no sense because this is Saturn we're talking about here. Saturn is an ice giant, so any of its moons should be mostly made of ice. Scientists think there are two possible explanations for this. The first is that the moon is actually a captured asteroid. Asteroids tend to be rocky with only a little bit of ice mixed in. So that would explain why Mimas doesn't look like the rest of Saturn's moons. The second explanation is more interesting. What if Mimas used to be a lot bigger but lost mass somehow? That would explain why it has a weird density and why it's so darn covered in craters. If it was once much larger, it wouldn't take much to knock chunks out of it. And we've seen this happen before, kind of. Scientists think that long ago, Saturn's moon Titan used to be way bigger. It still is bigger than Mimas, but it lost a chunk of itself that broke off and formed a smaller moon named Dione. So maybe something similar happened to Mimas. Maybe it lost a bunch of material that formed another moon. But what does the Death Star have to do with any of this? Well, the crater. The crater is named after German astronomer Friedrich Bessel, who was the first person to measure the distance between Earth and the star Proxima Centauri. But anyway, this crater is massive. It's 130 kilometers across and 5 kilometers deep. That means it takes up about a third of the entire moon. Now, it's hard to tell exactly how old this crater is, so we don't know for sure what caused it. It could have been caused by a big rock fragment breaking off of Mimas, which would fit nicely with the idea that Mimas used to be much larger. Or it could have been caused by something hitting Mimas. Now, the thing is, no matter what caused it, this crater changed Mimas forever. It knocked the moon out of shape and messed with its gravitational pull. But it might have done something else too. See, when it impacted, it might have generated a whole bunch of heat. This heat, along with the pressure from all of the rocks above it, could have melted some of the ice below the surface, forming a giant underground sea. And that's not a crazy idea. In fact, it's something that scientists have suspected for a while now. They just didn't have any proof. Now they have proof because in 2010, NASA's Cassini spacecraft discovered that Mimas was wobbling as it orbited Saturn. Now, you might think that's boring, but it's not. See, the gravity of an object affects how it moves through space. If there's something big nearby, its gravity will affect the object's path. For example, if a comet got close to Saturn, the planet's gravity would affect the comet's path and maybe even break it apart. The same thing happens with moons. The gravity of Saturn affects how Mimas moves around it, and that creates a sort of wobble. But that wobble tells us something about how much mass Mimas has. And if we know how much mass it has, we can figure out how dense it is. And if we know how dense it is, we can tell whether or not it's made of ice or rock or something else. This is important because if my mass is mostly made of ice, that wobble wouldn't match up with what we observe. In other words, my mass shouldn't wobble quite as much as it does if it's made of ice. The only way it makes sense is if my mass has a giant ball of rock at its core, and the most likely explanation for that is that it's actually an ice moon with a rocky mantle and a core. Remember, ice tends to float above denser materials, so it makes sense that the less dense ice would be on top. And that means there could be a giant ocean underneath Mimas's icy crust. Now, scientists don't know exactly how big this ocean is. Some say it's miles deep, while others say it's only a few dozen meters. So far, none of these scientists have been able to prove their theories. But luckily, we won't have to wait long to find out. In just a couple years, NASA will launch a mission called Dragonfly to study Titan, and while Titan is the main focus of this mission, Dragonfly will also make a brief stop at Mimas. It'll pass within 340 kilometers of the moon, which is close enough to measure its magnetic field. You see, moons with big underground oceans tend to have magnetic fields that point toward the surface, whereas moons without oceans have magnetic fields that point sideways. If Mimas has an ocean, Dragonfly will be able to detect that. And that would mean that beneath its icy surface, there's a world of liquid water just waiting to be explored. We hope they find one. Imagine if there was life there. We'd finally be able to say for sure that there are aliens somewhere in the universe. And hey, maybe they'll find a Death Star too. That'd be pretty cool. Speaking of cool things, we've been doing a lot of it lately. In case you didn't notice, we've been making a lot of changes around here. That's because we're trying to build something awesome. We want this channel to be the best place online for all things space, and that means making cool videos that'll take you beyond anything you could imagine. To do that, we need your help. So if you're into space and science and text stories and learning things, follow us because we're just getting started. Also, if you want to learn more about the incredible Dragonfly mission, check out the links in the description. Thanks for watching.